I had to make a lot of notes, though, because there's a lot to track here. So if you will indulge, shall we get nerdy?
Let's do it.
Let's get nerdy on FSU, the ACC, the grant of rights, and TV deals. In the grand scheme of things, what happened on December 22nd with Florida State finally filing this lawsuit to get out of the ACC is that it's a pretty standard contracts dispute. Okay. Now, if I've learned anything through osmosis with Kelly, is that any lawyer who has ever found themselves in a dispute like this will tell you that a good chunk of it reads like a contracts exam. Like, oh, you did this, you did this, you did this, you did this, you did this. Because I talked to somebody in the industry when this was all going on. They're like, yeah, they threw the kitchen sink at the wall. They're just throwing the kitchen sink, right? But it's not so much a kitchen sink just to see if anything sticks. It's more of like, we're going to do our best to trigger something with our contract. And typically that something, again, the only thing I've ever learned through osmosis with legal takes when it comes to contracts is any contract can be broken for the right price. It's the old $1 million man, Ted DiBiase. Everybody's got a price. So the bottom line here is FSU no longer wants to be in the ACC. And by doing this, they have now forced the conversation to start a math problem. What's it going to take? How much do you want to drag this out? What are we willing to walk away from? And how much it's going to cost us? Remember the math problem. We talked to Bubba Cunningham about this in the summertime. It was the whole point of the grant of rights was how much is it going to cost us to get out? And what did we find out on December 22nd from Florida State's Board of Trustees meeting? They told us the number.
Yeah. 572?
Pretty much. Are they going to pay that 572? No, because they feel that that's a penalty.
That's through 36, though. I think the most interesting thing about all this will be how much of this contract actually comes to the sunlight, which I've argued from the beginning. There's no way on earth that University of North Carolina and NC State can be in a contract, and that contract is not public record. Well, I find that personally disgusting, and I've said that in every interview that we've done. So I applaud Florida State for bringing this to light, because apparently, oh, look at that!
Yeah,
there's a unilateral option for for ESPN in 2027. Huh.
That was the new information that was interesting. That 2027 window. Now, quick aside, because a lot was made out of the contract, the grant of rights not being visible.
Yes.
You literally had to go to Charlotte and look at it as
it was in Greensboro when they were doing Greensboro
stuff, right?
The school's lawyers literally had to go to Greensboro.
My understanding is that all conferences have this. All conferences have this because of FOIA.
Right.
And they don't want what they view as sensitive documents. They don't want what is viewed as sensitive documents to be FOIA'd and then be out there for public record.
Don't take public tax money then. How about that? You don't want that either? You don't want the public support? It works both ways, man. You want to be Duke? Go be Duke.
Got it.
Okay? You want to be Wake? Go be Wake.
But my understanding is that every school doesn't have a copy of the TV
Joe,
contract.
I don't care. I don't care if every
SEC,
school,
all that stuff.
I don't care if every school jumps off the bridge, Joe. I ain't jumping off the bridge with them.
Now, specific to 2027, thanks to FSU, we do now know that there's this unilateral right to exercise a 9-year option to extend the TV deal through 2036, because it's always been reported that this deal just runs through 2036.
Right.
And that's important. Now,
that makes the clock all of a sudden 3 years.
How you view 2027 is an old Jedi from a certain point of view, how you want to look at it, right? Because FSU is using the contract to make their argument that the ACC is bad at business. When you read the complaint, it really does read like a message board. This is all the ways that the ACC has made terrible decisions. When you read the complaint, it almost sounds like you and I doing an entire episode where we're just like, why didn't the ACC do this? And why didn't they think of this? And blah, 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 right? So FSU is using this as an example of the ACC being bad at business. But this is going to sound crazy, but what if this is exactly what the ACC needs to get out of the contract? Because what have people been screaming about this entire time, including you and I, when it comes to this contract? Man, if only the ACC could take their rights to market. If only. Imagine if they could piece together, all right, NBC, you get this. Fox, you get this. All right, Disney, you get this. The NFL model, the Big Ten, has clearly like hammered and has been super, super successful with. The ACC's inability to take their rights to market has been the biggest screaming point that everybody's been making. But what if there was a way out? And the ACC, FSU, and it's, look at how marketable we are. In North Carolina, we're super marketable too. What do they have against possibly taking the thing to market as a whole, as the ACC working in concert? What do they have against that?
You just saw the Pac-12. What happened?
Is that the fear? Do you really think you're the Pac-12? You think you're not as marketable as they are?
Don't forget the Pac-12 lost UCLA and USC.
Because of poor leadership.
Okay, well, isn't that what the ACC is facing with Florida State?
And having West Coast brands, too. Sure. That's another matter as well.
I think you're overestimating what brands that the ACC does have.
Perhaps I am.
The league is flawed in how it is constructed. That has always been the league's biggest problem.
Here's the other thing. 2027. Do I know that ESPN's even going to be owned by Disney in 2027?
I think this is to your point, a math problem.
Yeah.
And now this contract allows them to shorten the math problem from 13 years to 3.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's important because I think ESPN looks at this and goes, all right, you have to, and again, let's get back to all of our talking points.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the ACC. It's not the Big Ten. It's not the SEC. It's ESPN and it's Fox.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So if you're Florida State and you're sitting here going, your ultimate question is, does the Big Ten want us?
Mm-hmm.
That we don't know the answer to that. Okay. I think it's safe to say the SEC, which is really ESPN, has no interest in moving you from this a silo of their income to this silo of your income.
To that point.
But there is another silo that I think is where this ultimately ends up.
I get that. And I think that silo, I think you and I are headed in the right direction. And why I think it's I don't want to dismiss 2027 and why getting out of the contract might actually be a good thing, or sticking with the contract might actually help you out. Do we
helping who? ESPN or the ACC?
Helping the ACC out too.
See, now you have to get into what is the actual ACC.
Right. But you also have to think about what is college football going to be? Because do we really think, given the direction that we're headed, given that Charlie Baker has even proposed this idea of a super conference or a rich person's conference, like the conference with the schools that have the money and actually want to play football, the whole idea of conferences might be moot by 2028, 2029, 2030. So would you rather just position yourself to be making that next jump? Because there's going to be schools that get kicked out. That's the next step.
Yeah, I got 5 right here.
Schools are going to get kicked out of the SEC. Schools are going to get kicked out of the Big Ten. They're going to get kicked out because at some point, because this is the other thing to look at with this grant of rights. Like if Florida State's successful, what's stopping like Ohio State or Alabama, Georgia, or Ohio State, Michigan, looking at going, so Indiana, what exactly do you do here? In the SEC,
you got to beat somebody.
Vanderbilt, what do you do here? Well, that somebody could be Florida State.
Sure.
It's a better brand that you can beat. Because that's the other thing about this too. Like, can we be real about Florida State, which has basically gone rogue this entire time? If Florida State's 6-6 this year and not in this conversation about the college football playoff, do you think what happens on December 22nd happens?
That they want to leave?
Or they're as bold as they are about
leaving?
leaving?
I'll give them credit for voicing these complaints before the season started. I think getting left out again. The reason they were left out is because Georgia didn't beat Alabama.
You and I recognize that, but they are convinced that the reason why they were left out is because the ACC is not viewed as a serious football conference.
Yeah, that's not the reason.
But the reason why the ACC is not viewed as a serious football conference is because Florida State's been going through the wilderness the last couple of years.
Oh,
Miami's been going through the wilderness the last couple of years. Clemson's fallen off a little bit. North Carolina, the chosen one, can't get out of their own way, right? Virginia Tech, what the heck you all been doing? So there's a lot of reasons why the ACC
let's get to that third silo, though. That's where I think this ends.
Which is that third silo being?
I think ESPN looks at it and goes, they get so much pushback from the SEC that the SEC says, no, we're not taking those teams.
Right.
ESPN then owning those teams basically says, fine.
Give us the 9th conference game.
Nope. We will put you in the Big 12. The Big 12 right now, next year, is set to have 16 teams.
Yeah.
I could see as a way of keeping Florida State as a potential compromise. I could see them saying, fine, we'll let you out of the ACC, but we're going to put you in the Big 12.
Okay, I can see that.
Well, they would put Florida State, Clemson, Virginia Tech, NC State, Louisville, and then I think the 3 new schools. I think they would put those 8 teams in the Big 12. I think Carolina, Virginia, Miami, and Duke end up in the Big 10. Fits their profile, gives them more people to beat in football. Helps basketball, obviously.
Well, first things first.
And then you got 5 teams: Boston College, Syracuse, Georgia Tech, Pittsburgh, and the Deacs that do not have a home.
First things first. Florida State has to get out of the grant of rights.
Well, I'm saying I think there's a compromise coming. You said there's a negotiation,
and that's where,
for a math price.
That's where it is.
But I think if you're ESPN, you're saying, I get it, rather than paying all of this stuff and rather than risk losing you to the Big 10 and Fox, I have an alternative. I have a compromise.
But here's where the compromise gets come.
Florida State wanted to go to the Big 12 back in 2013.
They did. So we'll close on the math problem itself. All right. Because that's what ultimately this is about. How much is it going to take to get out of this? How much is the ACC willing to fight this? And to your point about these schools that want to do XYZ, there's more of the schools that would be left out than not.
I got 5.
So
depending on what you think of Stanford and Cal. I don't care about Stanford and Cal.
I don't care about Stanford and Cal either. But there's only a handful of ACC schools that are desirable for another conference, or to make the Big 12 even better in the eyes of the ACC or the eyes of ESPN.
Yeah, there's 9 of them.
So you're going to be dealing with a good chunk of schools in the ACC that are willing to fight tooth and nail to keep the ACC as is as long as they can.
Other 8.
So that's the question.
But I don't know if they will fight.
That's the question.
If I'm going to pay you to go away, that's part of it too. If I'm going to pay you to go away,
but how much is the money? That's the thing. Again, these are the things that we don't know the answer to.
Right, because we don't know what the future is. But can't you see Connecticut, Syracuse, Boston College, Pittsburgh being in a conference together?
Yeah, I can see that. Or they might just go back to the Big East, for all I know.
That's what I'm saying. Like, can't you see like a Northeast and not being in FBS plus? Hey, I'm going to go win the national championship for the FBS.
I've been arguing this for a while. The Big East got it right by becoming a boutique basketball league. And that, what do you care about at Syracuse? What do you care about at Boston College and those types of places? So I could see that playing out. But there are too many competing interests that it's going to make it easy for the ACC to come up with a singular need to make Florida State go, all right, here's what you get, and then we're out.
I don't think there is such a thing as the ACC. But when you say that kind of collectively,
that's fine.
I don't see it.
I will say this though, money will be exchanged. The Florida State fans were like, Florida State figured out a way to break the grant rights. No, they just figured out what the math problem. No, they figured out the math problem.
No, they figured out the 27 thing.
You got
to give them some credit.
I will give them credit for that, but that could easily be picked up by ESPN and nothing changes. That's the easiest solution. But
the thing about ESPN, to your point about what these conferences look like, again, look at the composition. This gets back to, hey, by the way, ESPN. It's in our contract that says we can add these 3 schools that really don't help in any way, shape, or form your presentation. So I think that ultimately is what's going to cost the ACC. Is you now have a bunch of small private schools or schools who are in NFL cities that are Georgia Tech and Pittsburgh are 2 schools that, yes, have this unbelievable tradition. Yes, they have some passionate fans, but it's more of like a 20,000 fan base in NFL cities. Do you know what ESPN doesn't want? Hello. They don't need empty NFL stadiums that college teams play in. That's the American Athletic Conference. Okay. And that might be what it's called. I don't know. I'm just telling you that ESPN will ultimately look at this and go, okay, what is in our best interest? What can we control? And I think ultimately the Big 12 becomes something as a little bit of a compromise. Because the SEC, I could see the SEC holding hard on this.
Oh, I agree.
There's too many schools in the SEC who have nothing to gain by adding Florida State and Clemson.
You and I are in agreement when it comes to the SEC. I don't see them budging on Florida State. I don't see them budging on Clemson.
I don't either.
The Big Ten.
Now, maybe if you could convince Duke and Carolina, but I don't think you can convince Duke and Carolina.
The Big Ten makes the most amount of sense given how things are kind of setting up. And you could do pods with the Big Ten. You've got your West Coast contingent. You've got an East Coast contingent. You got a Midwest contingent.
Big Ten, which is really 18 teams right now.
Right. Yeah. You could add more schools and literally break it up into its own, NFL-like conferences if you wanted to.
And they already have all those television
and they have all the deals and everything
else.
The Big 12, I don't see the Big 12. The Big 12 becomes a landing spot for like the NC States of the world.
Right. That's what I have in there. But I have Florida State and Clemson. Because keep in mind, the Big 12 doesn't have a monster right now.
No.
Okay.
But that doesn't change anything for Florida State. This is where I disagree with the Big 12 aspect of it.
Okay.
You either go big or you go home. Going to the Big 12, you're just rearranging the chairs on the Titanic, if you will.
Sure.
There's no big dog in the Big 12. There's no big dog in the ACC. You're supposed to be the big dog. So why are you making this attitude? Well, you can go be the big dog in the 12. What changes?
I think it's more symbolic than anything else, right?
Which gets back to the crux of this. Florida State just wants out, man.
Right.
You and I have dealt with this, and everybody's dealt with this in certain walks of life. Once somebody decides something, they are going to work backwards.
When I saw John Swafford at the Greensboro Golf, Sedgefield, I said, "Oh man, Florida State fans are mad at you. They're mad at me." And he's like, they're always mad.
They're always mad.
Don't worry about them.
That's the thing. They're always mad. I remember the conversation we had with Holden Thorpe a while back where he talked about, John had to go down to Florida State and make him feel special and all this other stuff. And that's what it ultimately is about. So I think to wrap this back, Florida State has caused us to go all over the place with thinking about all these things when all they are is a rogue institution that's never happy. They're never happy. And you notice that there's no other schools that are getting on board with what Florida State wants to do. I'm not saying that these other schools aren't interested in what Florida State's doing, because obviously it's going to affect them. They're keeping an eye on it. But if there truly was a magnificent seven and Florida State was leading the charge, it wouldn't just be them. And all we're doing is we're looking at this malcontent, which gets back to the math problem. I sometimes think that we can get caught up in all the, this is going to happen and this school's going to go here. It could just be as simple of, you know what, Florida State, man, you're a pain in the ass. Have fun. Go get your Saudi investment fund. Go be independent for a few years. Maybe a conference will pick you up in the long run, and we'll figure out something here with the ACC. Because the college football playoff, expanding to 12, changes the calculus with a lot of this stuff. Because again, that whole business about the Big 12, all you're really doing is making another version of the ACC with no real big dogs in it, and they might get one school, the conference champ, that gets to go to it. How's that any different than the ACC? Honestly, how's that any different?
If it had 24 teams, I would imagine it would have more than one in the playoff. But
24 teams. Again, that's unsustainable. That's why that's when we get, by the time we get to conferences with 24 teams, we're going to have a super conference. Yeah. It's going to be a completely different thing. So anyway,
I mean, you're at 16 and 18 and 16 next year.
You can,
and 17 for the ACC.